Hello and welcome to our trip report for our October 2023 repositioning cruise from the port of Southampton to Barcelona on board the new Norwegian Prima from the Norwegian Cruise Line. This was our third cruise with the line and our return to them, as they were actually the first line we cruised with and who we enjoyed our second cruise with, but a line that we hadn't sailed with since then. We had some poor experiences with the landside operations of the line, but we had always enjoyed the onboard experience with them. So would that continue on this journey? Sadly, the answer to that must be no overall, as the experience was much different on board this ship, and while some of that was down to the ship itself and the type of cruise that we were on, we also experienced issues with staff for the first time ever on board a cruise ship. Aside from those negatives, we still enjoyed the holiday overall, and there were many positives to like about the ship, especially the boardwalk and indulge food hall areas. And never forget that these are just our thoughts of our cruise on the Prima, which are all subjective. Our journey started at the port of Southampton at the Horizon Terminal, before heading to Le Havre and Verdon in France, La Coruna, Cadiz, Motril and Valencia in Spain, Lisbon in Portugal, and Ibiza and Palma in the Balearic Islands, before we ended in Barcelona. With a total length of 12 nights and just one sea day, this was a port-intensive cruise of the Iberian Peninsula. As ever, don't forget to like and subscribe, and why not leave a comment below, and we would love to hear your views on this list. My name is Darren, and this is our Southampton to Barcelona, on board the Norwegian Prima, trip report, part 1. In this first part, we will be focusing on the Atlantic seaports that we visited before we headed into the Mediterranean, including Le Havre, Verdon, La Coruna, Vigo, Cadiz and Lisbon. We set sail from the port of Southampton on the south coast of England, and whilst we had sailed from there before, this was our first time setting sail from the new Horizon Terminal. We had quite the adventure in getting there, as we travelled down from Yorkshire to park at Birmingham Airport. The original plan had been to get the train down to Southampton, directly from the airport, but with strikes cancelling that option, we would need to take a coach from the airport to Oxford, and then from Oxford to Southampton. Thanks to an issue with the Oxford coach, we had a long delay and didn't arrive into Southampton until late at night, and after a poor night's sleep in a hotel that turned out to be nothing more than a hostel for those on stag and hen do's, we would arrive at the terminal nice and early. Thankfully, things started to improve at this point, and after dropping off our bags outside, we waited briefly for security to open before breezing through, heading upstairs and checking in. The whole process was quick, easy, and the staff were friendly. What more do you need from a cruise terminal? As a new build, the terminal is spacious, clean, and there is plenty of seating whilst you wait. Our first night on board just saw us exploring the ship, before grabbing a bite to eat, and then a bit of an early night, after not getting too much sleep in the hotel. Our journey was a port-intensive one, so there was no day at sea to ease into the cruise, as we would arrive early into the port of Le Havre in France the morning after leaving the UK. This was our first visit to Le Havre, and overall we have to say it was well worth visiting. When doing our pre-cruise research, it did seem to be a port people either liked or hated, and we can understand why that is the case. The town is certainly not a touristy one, and if you have only ever seen France on travel shows, it may not live up to the expectation, but what it is a slice of real France, and we always like somewhere that feels authentic. It is the sort of place where you can just walk around, see what you come across, and just enjoy a day exploring. But that can also be an issue for those with mobility issues, of course, especially as it is around a 30 to 40 minute walk from the dock to the town centre. And although there were shuttle buses for €7 each, in true stereotypical French fashion, the driver spent more time on breaks than actually driving. After our only sea day, we arrived at the port of Verdon, and sadly this must go down as being one of the worst ever cruise ports we have visited. A big part of that is down to the fact it just isn't a cruise port at all, but it is a small container quay, but what draws a limited amount of cruise ship is its relative closeness to Bordeaux. it is still about an hour to the city and to the many vineyards in the region, which is why a line such as NCL are amongst the few to visit Le Verdon, as they can sell incredibly overpriced excursions to Bordeaux and to those wineries. Le Verdon itself has nothing there apart from a small village, which is still quite a long walk from the ship through scrubland, and although there was a shuttle to a near seaside town for $20 each, it really wasn't worth it. We knew this wasn't going to be a port for us before we arrived, so we had planned for this to be a relaxed day on board the ship, where we could take advantage of it being quiet to enjoy all that this ship had to offer. Unfortunately, most of our fellow cruisers had come to the same conclusion, and that meant the ship was busy all day in what turned out to be a bit of a wasted port day for all but a handful of cruisers setting off on excursions. Thankfully, our next port proved to be much better, as we would call into Spain for the first time and the port of La Coruna. This was the first big organisational problem to crop up on our trip, as the port itself wasn't ready for us when we arrived, and after waiting for an hour for clearance, the security staff didn't use the main disembarkation area. Instead, they opened one temporary desk in the main atrium, so not only did that leave a huge queue, but people were coming from multiple decks and areas, leading to lots of confusion and lots of angry passengers. The layout of the city on the peninsula, flanked by an estuary on the east and a large bay on the west, with the town in the centre, means that you can walk from the ship, along the seafront, through the town centre, and appear at another promenade. That makes for a very walkable city, and that's exactly what we did, but one issue we did find was the fact that we didn't dock until 1 PM, so a lot of the shops and attractions were closed for siesta. La Coruna was the first port where many had to spend their time once back on board, queuing at reception or at the shore excursion desk, as all of those delays led to many people missing out on excursions or pre-booked attractions. Our next port was also in Galicia, and it was also a port we enjoyed, but it was actually a port we shouldn't have been at. When we booked our cruise just a few months before sailing, we were supposed to visit the port of Lexois, near Porto, and that was one of the big draws for us booking the cruise. Porto was somewhere we had wanted to visit for some time, but thankfully its replacement, the Spanish port of Vigo, still proved to be a good day on shore. Vigo is another port where you can simply stroll off the ship, head into the town centre, and either explore or head for a cafe, but we decided to set off exploring. That involved walking up a huge hill to the city's fortress of El Castro, although there were some handily placed travellators to take some of the strain. The fortress gives great views of not just the city, but of the whole region, including the port where your ship is docked. After walking back down the hill, we walked around the shopping district and headed back to the ship and into the Indulge food hall, something that had quickly become our go-to place for a quick bite to eat. The next day saw us visit Portugal for the first, and our only time on this cruise, where we sailed down the Tagus River and into the capital city of Lisbon. Lisbon, or Lisboa if you prefer, is somewhere we had visited twice before, but never on a cruise, so it's great to sail under the Pont 25 de Abril suspension bridge. Lisbon must be one of the best entrances to a cruise port in Europe, as you sail past the seaside resort of Cascais, past the monastery and cathedral at Debellum, before sailing past the city centre and docking within walking distance of the old town and adjacent to a number of the city's main attractions. Having already spent some time in the city, we simply bought a metro car for the day and headed down to Debellum by using the metro and train. Unfortunately, there was a military parade going on when we got there, which closed some streets and made it impossible to enjoy walking around the many attractions in this upmarket part of the city. So we took a stroll around the small botanical garden before jumping on the bus back into the city centre. After arriving back at the Caisy-Sodre station, we walked across the road to the Time Out Market to enjoy a pastéis de nata, something we always must enjoy when in Portugal. After that, we walked around the Barrio Alto Old Town before wandering around the main shopping street and heading back down the riverfront to our waiting ship. Tea was once again in the Indulge food hall before we grabbed a comfortable seat at the back of the ship and watched the comings and goings of Lisboa. After arriving into the city in the dark, We headed up to the top deck to get a good view of our sail away, which saw hundreds wave us off from the town centre, before getting the chance to get an up-close view of the city's impressive suspension bridge. Cadiz is a wonderful city, and somewhere that we would love to explore, and one of the great things about the port is that you dock within walking distance of the old town centre. But we will never get the chance to explore it, as we would opt for an excursion to the nearby city of Seville. Seville, or Sevilla as is known in Spanish, is somewhere both my wife and I had wanted to visit for some time, and with Porto disappearing from the schedule, it was one of the destinations we were looking forward to visiting the most. It can often be the case that when you build somewhere up in your head, you are disappointed when you get there, but Seville lived up to expectation, with the incredible Plaza de España being the highlight of our visit. The city centre is smaller than we expected, but with the heat being in the mid-40°C, that was somewhat of a relief, as we still racked up around 10 miles walking around the city streets. One of the great things about the port of Cadiz is that you see a lot of the city from the top deck of your ship, so when we got back to the Prima, we grabbed a bite to eat and sat at the back of the ship once more, enjoying the views and watching the sun go down. So that is where we're going to leave this part of the review, and next time we'll start at the port of Motril, just inside the Mediterranean Sea, where we head on another excursion to the historic city of Granada. So all that remains to be said is thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed our Southampton to Barcelona trip report on board the Norwegian Prima, and see you next time.